In the last lecture, we started our discussion on welfare program and labor supply, and then we looked at the Korea's welfare program, and then we started our discussion on theoretical analysis of welfare program in the labor market. So let me give you just a brief review of the last part, leisure choice, work leisure choice model. So what happens here is that if we introduce the welfare benefit in general, then we can write down the benefit, welfare benefit using this equation. So G is the benefit, the maximum benefit one can get if the income is 0, and then since the welfare program reduces the benefit as the individual's own earnings increase, so we as earnings increases, then benefit reduces. Okay, and T is the rate at which the benefit is reduced. So we call T as the implicit tax rate, meaning that by reducing the welfare benefit payment to the family or the individual, the government actually can save the money, right? And then part of the income, his or her own income, contributes to the government's treasury by the form of reduced benefits. So that's why we call T as the implicit tax rate. So if we include B into the budget constraint is going to look like this. Okay? So as you can see that wage rate for the individual is not W. Actually, now it becomes 1 minus T times W. After implicit tax wage rate. Okay. So using the diagram, you can draw this type of budget constraint. So without any welfare benefit, this is just a budget constraint. But now, with the welfare benefit, if the individual doesn't have any income, so where the leisure choice is T, then the individual gets G, and then the benefit will become will be reduced. Okay, so benefit is basically, you can see it as a distance between this point and his own earnings. Okay, so it becomes smaller by the rate of T. So the slope has become 1 minus T times W. Okay? That's what you have seen. So two things you can notice here. One is that the individual's income cannot be lower with welfare benefit than without welfare benefit. Okay? So welfare benefit cannot make this person poorer. Right? So even though the benefit gets smaller and smaller, still the individual gets higher income. Okay, than the case without the benefit. Okay, so the individual income would be higher. Okay, with welfare benefit, but at the same time, the wage rate is lower because the individual should pay the implicit tax. Okay? And then we have seen two extreme cases. One is the implicit tax rate is 100%. Okay? This is the case where the government reduces the benefit by exactly the amount the individual earns. Okay? So in this case, if the individual earns, let's say, $100, then the benefit goes down by $100. So at the end, the individual will, after the implicit tax, the individual will keep the same income, JB. So this is, for example, in Korea's case, the livelihood allowance has this structure, right? So livelihood allowance, if you recall, in Korea's program, they have a threshold, okay? And then if income goes below the threshold, so if we go back, for example, so livelihood threshold livelihood allowance threshold is 29% of the median income. So for the family of 4, it's about 1.3 million won. Okay? And the rule says the livelihood allowance would be the minimum income threshold minus own household income. So own household income goes up by, let's say, 10,000 won, then the allowance goes down by 10,000 won. So implicit tax rate of 100%. So which means that as long as the individual's own income is below that threshold, the individual's income would be equal to this minimum income. Okay. Actually, I am simplifying this because actually by the structure of the program, the individual will get actually more than livelihood allowance. The individual will get medical, housing, and education allowance. So strictly speaking, the individual actually gets more than the threshold. Okay? So the individual gets threshold, but also medical allowance. If the individual does not occur any medical expense, then this should be 0. Education allowance, if the individual has no child in school, no education allowance, but housing allowance generally they would get. So actually it's a little more complicated, more than that, but if we concentrate on the livelihood allowance only, then it basically has the 100% implicit tax rate. And as I said, actually in Korea's older program, as I said, that this is the current program is a modified version and modified in 2015. Before that change, the Korea's program was actually like this one. The whole thing should be equal to the basic cost of living. Okay, but now they changed the system. But anyway, livelihood allowance has this structure, and then we looked at another extreme example. For example, like some disability program that gives you income only when you are not able to work, meaning that if you work, then you don't get anything. So this is the second extreme case. Now, what we are going to look at is the first thing is the participation in welfare program and the labor supply. Okay. And three things. Okay, let me explain these using the diagrams. Now, first thing is the individual who would not participate in the welfare program. So it's pretty simple. Whether the individual becomes welfare recipient or not, okay, at least partly determines by how much the person earns or how much the person decides to earn. Okay? So in this case, in this particular case, think of individual who are earning, whose choice is point E with this indifference curve. Okay? And when we introduce, for example, the welfare program with its BJT budget constraint, as you can see, if the individual wants to be a welfare recipient, the individual should be on the budget line BJ, right? So you can see that any choice on BJ makes this person worse off. Okay? So if this person chooses, let's say, a point this one, this person's indifference curve would be at the lower level. So as you can see that this individual would not participate in the welfare program. Okay? So as you can see that if the individual is earning sufficiently high income, this individual is likely to have this type of indifference curve. Okay? So higher income individuals are not likely to try to participate in the welfare program. How can they try? Actually, what they can do is that if they really want to be a welfare recipient, this individual can actually stop working somehow and then claim the benefit. Actually, it's possible. Okay? So what can happen is that what I'm saying is, for example, I don't have that diagram. What is possible is that if you think of this individual, and then if there is a welfare program now, and then it's going to look like this, for example. Okay. And then what can happen is that this individual actually can choose this point and become better off. Okay. So what happens here is that this individual will reduce the own income. Okay? So this individual will actually have more leisure and reduced income and become welfare recipient. Okay? So in this case, this individual will actually choose to be on welfare program. So before, actually if this individual was stayed at the same point, the individual wouldn't be a welfare recipient because the individual's income is actually above the threshold. Okay? But actually in this case, the individual actually reduces labor supply and becomes welfare recipient. So it's possible that, as you can see, that this is a better choice for the individuals, okay, in terms of their utility level. Why? Individual will get lower consumption, but more leisure. So this individual actually has, is better off in the sense that this individual actually now enjoys more leisure. That's more important than losing some consumption. So that can happen. Actually, I think that I have a diagram like this later. So that's the first part. So those with sufficiently high income will not participate in the welfare program. Now, okay, second thing is that, okay, this one is not shown in the diagram, but actually this should be a common sense. Some among those with sufficiently low income, some individuals who have lower income, let's say some individuals have the income lower than the threshold. This individual wouldn't be, some of them wouldn't be participating in the welfare program, okay? So not all poorer individuals or households become welfare recipient. They do not apply. Okay, why? One can be the stigma. Okay, this is often called the stigma effect. Stigma is that it's just a psychological cost. Okay, you don't want to be labeled as, for example, like a welfare recipient. Okay, so it can be socially undesirable label. Okay, for you or for your family, so you don't want to do that. Okay? So that kind of these first things, so stigma effect actually is pretty common. The welfare programs and other programs for, let's say, poorer individuals, some people just avoid it because they don't want to be stigmatized as someone dependent on others. Okay? And it can be a fixed cost, it's simple, just the application cost or activities. Activities meaning is that, as I said, if you become welfare recipient, okay, some recipients should participate in certain programs, for example, in Korea's case, like a self-sufficiency program to keep the benefit. Okay? Some individuals may find it, let's say it's just bothersome to do it, so just to drop it. Okay? So that could be other reasons, like a fixed cost. Okay? This is not only I'm not talking about only the monetary cost. It can be just a psychological cost. You don't want to just to do it. Okay? So you can find lots of people, okay, not small number, actually, significant number of people who should be eligible for the program, just simply do not apply. Okay. So that's another thing. We did not actually deal with that issue in our particular case. Okay. In our case, we don't assume any stigma or fixed cost. Okay. We assume that individuals is willing to participate in welfare program as long as that it gives that individual the higher utility. But in reality, that's not necessarily true. The third one is that the more generous program, higher G or lower T. Okay, the generosity of a program is two things. One is higher benefit. Higher benefit comes from, first, for example, higher G. Okay, that gives a more, so starting point is higher. Okay? Or lower T, so lower implicit tax. Okay? So you lose less money when you earn your own income. So that's another way to make the program more generous. And it makes it will attract more individuals. That's pretty simple. If we increase G here, okay, for example, in this case, in this particular case, this individual is not participating in the current program. But if we increase G from G0 to G1, this program will become more generous, and then obviously this individual is now willing to participate. Okay? So, I mean, it's intuitively should be obvious. If the welfare program is more generous, more individuals want to be in the program. Okay? Another possibility is make the implicit tax rate lower. So that means that individual will lose less of their own income. And it makes, in this diagram, the budget constraint becomes steeper. Okay? And as you can see now, E0 will be in the program. Okay? So generosity of the program will affect the welfare participation. Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we looked at the statistics of Korean program participants, 2015, it saw a large increase of participation. It's simply because that program has become more generous. Okay? So, for example, in Korea's case, they increased to G from G0 to G1, right? So, as I said, that they changed the threshold from the basic cost of living to 29%. I'm talking about livelihood allowance. So it used to be the basic cost of living. And then it changed to 29% of the median income. And they designed it that 29% of median income is actually higher than the basic cost of living. So what they mean is that they actually increased G0 to G1. Okay? And then it attracted more participation. Okay? More people become eligible. Okay? And in some cases, actually, the individual actually would be actively be in the program by reducing labor supply. That one I will talk about now. Now, what is interesting about the welfare program is the one thing that we can think about the cost of welfare program is the financial cost. Okay, how do you actually pay for it? It should come from the general tax revenue. So general tax will be, more of the tax will be used to finance the welfare program. But there is another cost to the society or to the economy. Okay, that one is that the less individuals will work, or more of them will reduce labor supply. Why? Well, first thing what you can see here is that, let's think of point D. So without any welfare program, this individual is working at point D, even though the income is not that high. Now, let's say we have this welfare program, okay? And then when we introduce this welfare program, what happens to individual's choice? It will become from D to E. It does not go straight up. It does not go this way. It goes to the right, okay? Which means the individual will work less, okay? From D to E. Okay, now let's think about it. Let's think of income and substitution effect. Okay? Actually, one thing we should think about is that, is this the only way? So, for example, when we discuss the effect of change in wage rate on the labor supply, we said that it is not one direction. It can be it can increase or decrease labor supply depending on income and substitution effect. Okay? So when we look at this one, we should ask whether this is necessarily the case. Okay? Is it possible that this individual will actually work more, okay, or even work the same amount of time? Okay? So we should look at is the income and substitution effect. Okay? Because when we discussed, for example, when the wage goes up, by income effect, the individual will work less. By substitution effect, the individual will work more. Okay? So there's the opposite directions. So we should see here is that whether the income and substitution effect has opposite direction or the same direction. Okay, let's see. Actually, our suspicion is that since the wage rate is lower, right? Because of implicit tax, the wage is lower. So if we apply our logic of income and substitution effect, by income effect, the individual may work more or less. Since the wage rate is lower, work less, right? It seems a possibility. However, if we actually draw a hypothetical line, this is what we have done when we studied income and substitution effect. We draw a hypothetical line that is parallel to the old one, okay? Old budget constraint, which is WTT, and touches the new indifference curve U prime, U1, whatever, U star. U star, we draw this line, okay? And then D to D prime is by income effect. And it reduces, actually, it does not increase labor supply, it reduces labor supply. Why does it reduce labor supply? We said that when the wage rate is lower, by income effect, the individual will work more, right? But in this case, actually, the income effect makes the individual work less. Why? Because the structure of the welfare program makes this individual have higher income, right? Because welfare, as I said, welfare program cannot make an individual poorer, right? No matter what. So, welfare recipient, if this individual was, in this case, it's not this case, okay, it's different. The individual was here, this individual cannot be made poorer by welfare program, okay? Because the individual will get free money, okay? So that makes this individual actually have higher income. So if this individual's wage rate did not change, the individual will simply get this G, amount G, okay? So it's just by the income effect, the individual will work less. And then D prime to E is substitution effect. And actually, since its wage rate is lower, the individual will work less. Okay? So that's the basic idea of work disincentive effect of welfare program. Okay? So the individual, let's say this individual had income lower than the threshold. The threshold is here. Okay? And then this individual will work less. Okay? Both by income effect and substitution effect. Okay? By income effect, because the individual will get higher income. Okay? By substitution effect, because the individual will get lower wage rate because of the implicit tax. Nominally, the individual wage rate is the same, but after implicit tax, the individual wage rate is lower. Okay, another possibility is that this is the possibility. Another possibility, the individual was actually above the threshold. So if this individual did not change anything, this individual would be working the same amount of work. But as you can see, because of this individual's indifference curve, as you can see, this individual will be actually better off by moving from D to E. So this individual will actually get lower income, but increase in leisure is enough to compensate for the loss of income. Okay? So that is the second case. So the individual will probably consume less, but happier because he or she can enjoy more leisure time. Okay? So in this case also, reduce the labor supply. Okay? The only way this individual can join the welfare program is by reducing the labor supply. So by earning less. Okay, so that's what you have seen. Okay, now let me show you the one. Okay, in this case, actually one thing is that you can see here is that this individual is actually still working, even though the shorter hours, still working. But if the program has 100% implicit tax rate, like this one, what would be the individual's choice? Working some hours? No, it should be working none. Why? I mean, as you can see, it's obvious. If the individual chooses anything in between, this individual's indifference curve will be lower. And intuitively speaking, it should be the case. It should be the case. Why? Because if you work more, if you work or not work, you get the same income, right? So what's the point of working? Okay? As long as you like leisure, if you get the same income with working or without working, the individual should choose no work, right? Because it would not affect consumption. It increases only the leisure. So that's the best thing. So this individual will not work at all. So with 100% implicit tax rate, it has no incentive to work whatsoever. Okay. So two things. So in summary, both the income and the substance effects reduce labor supply. That's what we have seen. And second effect is some individuals who would be ineligible otherwise may cut down work and participate in the welfare program. That's the second thing. And then this one extreme case is that actually with 100% implicit tax rate, no welfare participant has an incentive to work. Okay? So no one will work here. Okay. So this is actually quite important point. Okay, the point is, welfare program by its own nature will decrease labor supply. Why? Think of the welfare program. Welfare program, to do its function, it should help the poorest people, right? So which means that if you're poor, you should get more help. That's how the welfare program works. Okay? And then if you become less poor, okay, the welfare program should give you lower benefit. Why? If the welfare program does not give you the lower benefit, it means at the end everyone will get the welfare benefit, right? So it doesn't make any sense. And then it's not possible to have that kind of program, obviously. You will run out of money. Okay? So welfare program should have this feature. Okay? The poorest should get more benefit. Okay? And then when you have more and more income, you should get lower benefit. Okay? Okay, how the benefit reduces will depend on the program. It can be 100%, or it can be 50%, whatever, but still, you should get the lower benefit, which means you should pay the implicit tax. And the two features that you should get higher income, okay, if you're poorer, and then you should pay implicit tax, which means theoretically, it will always reduce labor supply. There is no way the welfare program can make you work more. Okay? There's only one direction, theoretically. Okay? So that's actually the cost of welfare. That's actually a trade-off from the society's point of view. Okay? So by helping out the poorest individuals, society can achieve some goal. Okay? So making sure that everyone maintains a basic level of living, that should be quite important. Okay? From, let's say, social justice point of view, these people may be just unfortunate. Okay? They may be, let's say, they may be just unlucky. Okay? We can be unlucky. Anybody can be unlucky. Okay? You can, get hurt or whatever. So you may lose your own job, and then you may be in that kind of position. Okay? So by helping out those people, okay, the society can actually achieve that kind of role, that making sure that everybody maintains a certain level of living, and then it makes people probably happy all around. You don't want to see starving people, homeless kids. You don't want to see homeless kids around, right? So that's important. But there is always a trade-off. The trade-off here is obviously how you finance it. That's one thing. But second thing is, quite important one, is that it makes those recipients less likely to work, or work, even if they work less than the case without the welfare program. And in this case, this is particularly bad in a sense that no one is willing to work. Some people would say that these people are lazy, right? Actually, some people characterize the welfare recipients as lazy people, okay, depending on other people's money and without making their own effort to make a living. If you actually see that, it seems like that way. Actually, if I have shown you the statistics. In our own country, almost no one who receives the welfare benefit, basic livelihood security program, almost nobody works. Okay, 98% of them are non-workers. Okay? So some people may call them lazy. Actually, that's sometimes but we should remember, these are not actually lazy people. These are people actually who makes the best choices given the circumstances. The best choices happen to be not working, which means, right, as an economics student, if you were in this position, you would not work, right? Because that's the best choice. That makes you the happiest under the circumstances. So it is wrong to call these people lazy. Okay? Actually, what we should ask is, how can we design the welfare program better to be out of this point E? But actually, we probably giving them a wrong incentive. Okay? Not these people are lazy, but probably we are giving them a wrong incentive. So incentives you can see from the theoretically, under these circumstances, almost no one will choose to work. Even I would not choose to work if I be here. Okay? So we should ask the system, how the system works. Okay? Now, how do we make this individual to actually, to get out of it? Okay, one thing is that, that question we will ask a little later. Okay, what we are asking here is that when you change the parameter of a program, then how it changes labor supply. Okay, one easy one is that if we make the program more generous by making higher G, okay, and the individual will work even less. Okay, so this is the recipient before, and then we make them more generous, and then work less even because of the pure income effect. As you can see clearly, there is a pure income effect. Right? And in this case, the individual was not in the program. Now with higher G, this individual will be in the program, so this individual will work less, okay, from E0 to E1. Now, T is an important point, okay. T is the implicit tax rate, okay. And as you can see that if we have implicit tax rate of 100%, no one would work, theoretically. Okay. So this type of program has been attacked. Actually, it's very easy to see that there is no incentive to work. So how do we fix it? Actually, one way of fixing it is to make T lower. So let's make implicit tax rate below 100%. So we do not reduce the benefit by the amount of their own income, so by a certain percentage of their own income. Let's say 20%, 50%, whatever. So if we can do that, we can actually, sure, we can make this individual to work. But, however, not everyone who's not working. Because, do I have that diagram? No. Clearly, this case, the individual will work. But actually, if the individual has very high preference for leisure, even if implicit tax rate is lower, this individual would not change the behavior. So some individuals will work, okay, but not everyone. Okay, depending on their relative preference for leisure. Those who have stronger preference for leisure still not working, even though implicit tax rate is lower than 100%. But one good thing is that individual will work more. Some individuals will now start working. So labor supply overall will increase. Okay? But there is a problem. The problem here is that some individuals now actually joins the welfare program by reducing their labor supply. So there can be two sides. Okay? One side here is that they will now work, but in this side, labor supply will reduce. Okay? So overall, what happens is that we should look at the both sides. Okay? So that is, okay, this is the one that the first point. Reducing T increases the lowest labor supply individuals. In that case, like no one who's working, the individuals of no work to work more, but at the cost of some labor supply reduction among higher labor supply individuals. Okay? So this individual will reduce the labor supply. Okay, there is a worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is that when you reduce T, for example, these individuals have this type of indifference curve. So actually no one changes their behavior. Okay? So existing recipient does not increase labor supply. The same thing. But it only induces this individual to be on the welfare. Okay? So this is the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is that it changes nothing about the existing recipient. It just increases the number of recipients, okay, by making these individuals to participate in the welfare program. This is actually a funny thing because if you funny thing in the sense that if you look at this program, this old program with the implicit tax rate of 100%, no one's working, right? Now, if you make the T lower, and then now we've seen that some individuals now join the program and become welfare recipient. Now we see some workers, right? So overall, it looks like welfare recipients become more likely to be workers, right? Because before, no one was working. Now we have some are working, some welfare recipients. Okay? However, this is actually, it's not the case. Actually, what we hope is to make these individuals to work, but it didn't happen. What happened is only some working individuals just to join the program, right? So overall, it looks like something happened, something good happened, because we just reduced percentage of non-workers from 100% to, let's say, 90%. So 10% of them are working now. But it's not because these people are working, but because there are new people who are in welfare, used to be non-welfare recipient. Okay? So that is the, so this is the point. Lowering T may increase the average labor supply of welfare recipients, not increase the average labor supply, because now the average labor supply was 0, now it's not 0, because some are working. So when you average them out, so not because existing recipients work more, but because new working recipients are added to the welfare roll. Okay? So this is actually an important point when you think of, changing T. Okay. Now, if you actually look at the program change of Korea's case in 2015, what happened was actually, I don't know about that one, whether they increased. What happened in Korea in 2015 was, in a sense, to decrease the implicit tax rate. Because as I said before, whole program was all or nothing. So you get all the benefits if you are eligible, if your income is below the basic cost of living. So it was like this. But now they changed the eligibility condition for each allowance. Okay? So even if your income is above the threshold, you still can get other allowances. So in that sense, now the welfare program has this type of budget constraint. Before, you lose everything. If your income goes above the basic cost of living, you lose everything. Now, even if your income goes above, let's say, the threshold for lowest threshold, which is threshold for the livelihood allowance, 29% of median income, still you can get medical allowance, okay? Education allowance, housing allowance. Your income goes up more, then you lose one thing, but still you can get two more. And then you lose one thing, and so in the sense that make T actually lower. So you can think that actually that's what tried in Korea. Because actually there was a, as I said, there was a criticism about this Korea's basic livelihood security program precisely because the implicit tax rate was 100%. Because among the welfare recipients, actually welfare recipients themselves complained that, it's a strange wording, but the welfare recipient actually complained that I cannot work because if I work and my income goes above the basic cost of living, I will lose everything, right? Because they cannot get medical allowance, they cannot get housing allowance, they cannot get education allowance, okay? So they lose everything. So that's actually what they complained about. So the cost of working and earning some money is just too high. Basically, they were complaining in a sense, in our sense, they were complaining about implicit tax rate is 100%. So I don't want to go above it. Okay, so that was the complaint. So that's one reason why the Korean government changed the program to make allowance. Each allowance has different threshold. So they want to make T to be less than 100%. Actually, that's the common way of changing the program because welfare program, in the simplest sense, you can think of is this type of program. Okay? So the society sets a certain level of minimum income for everyone. They have this idea. Actually, we have that idea. We often hear that idea. That let's okay, a little different, but anyway. So kind of the simplest idea of welfare is that we should make sure that everyone maintains at least the basic level of living. Okay, so no one's income should be below this level. So that idea is like an income floor idea. We should have an income floor. So income cannot go lower than that floor. So that's the idea. That's the simplest idea. Okay? And this idea is, if you think it's very intuitive. Okay? Then if you have your own income, okay, and since you can cover this much, the society covers just only the difference. Okay? It seems to be quite fair. Okay? But the problem here, as I said, is you have seen that this one actually have very strong disincentive to work. Okay. So this program, actually, for example, in the U.S. has this kind of program. Okay. In Korea, we had this kind of program. Now we changed it a little bit, and then U.S. case they changed a lot actually in late 1990s. Okay. So changing the welfare program to make, in a sense, to have the less incentive, less work disincentive, is often called the welfare reform. Okay? So we have to reform the welfare program to, in a way, to make individuals like a transition from welfare to work, okay, more actively. So there had been some changes in welfare program in some countries. And in the US case, for example, it happened in late 1990s. And one thing they tried is time limit. So time limit idea is pretty simple. We just set a lifetime limit for each individual, okay? And then you can be on welfare recipient only for that amount of time. More than that, you are on your own. Okay? So in the US case, they set up the 5-year time limit. Okay? Actually 60 months. So every time, for example, every time you get a welfare transfer, your 1 month is gone. Okay? So for your lifetime, 60 months. 60 months is not exactly, because depending on your circumstances, it may change a bit. But anyway, so that's the idea. Okay, so they tried it. What happens? I mean, actually, if you think about it, it's actually pretty intuitive. Okay. There's an actual time limit, 5 years. Okay, and what they saw in reality is that people often get out of welfare in advance, so they do not wait until the 5-year expires. They get out, let's say 4 years, okay, 1 or 2 years in advance. Why? Because it's like a saving, right? So you don't want to use up all your 5 years, okay? Because if you believe that, okay, I may be in trouble in the future, and then you should have at least 1 or 2 years in your bank, okay, to get welfare program. So that's what they found out. So people often gets the work, okay, well in advance of expiration of welfare program. In Korea's case, we have no time limit. Okay, you can be on welfare as long as you are eligible. Okay? We have seen that quite a significant portion of welfare recipients are on the welfare roll for more than 10 years. Okay? So there is no time limit. Actually, in the US, it was possible in late 1990s. First, because there was just such a bad publicity about the welfare recipients. Just a bad publicity. So, pretty bad publicity. So, in that the old US program has exactly this type of budget constraint. So almost no one was working. So what's worse is that welfare amount was tied to the number of kids you have. So you have more kids, then you get more higher welfare. Okay? And welfare recipients tend to have more kids. And some people actually believe that these people just produce more kids to get more money. Okay? There was actually bad publicity. So that's one thing. And second thing is actually was that in the late 1990s, the US economy was so good. So the labor market was so good. So if we set the time limit here, if we change the welfare system, a lot of people will be, they expected they will be able to work. Right? Because the labor market was so good, so these people don't have to be a welfare recipients. They can find their job on their own. So they changed the system. Actually, that was actually pretty radical change in the welfare system in the US. Okay, another thing is, another crude way of changing the behavior of individual is to just make the individual to work, to be eligible for the welfare program. So one crude way is, okay, you get welfare benefit only when your working hour is longer than a certain threshold. So you should, for example, work at least 20 hours a week or 15 hours a week to be able to get welfare. Okay. If you do not work or work for only for short hours, you wouldn't get any benefit. Just work requirement. Okay. You set the work requirement. So individual like this one used to be a welfare recipient. Now there is a limit like this. This person will be out of welfare. So this individual will just forced to work more. Okay, this individual like this will work only the minimum, but still will work more. So that's one way of making individuals just to work. Just to set up the program like this way. Okay. Now, this is a problem, however, this is not that easy because obviously lots of welfare recipients are not able to work, right? You cannot force somebody who are not able to work, right? You cannot, disabled people, okay, cannot work. So even if they work only for short hours. You cannot force them to work. So the prerequisite for this program to work is to tag. Actually, we use the term tagging because they use it in the welfare literature. But tagging is just classifying recipients into two groups, who are able to work, who are not able to work. Okay? So if you are able to work, you should work for that amount of time. If you're not able to work, you're okay. Okay? You don't have to work. So tagging is necessary, obviously. Okay? However, tagging is costly. Why? You should check everyone, whether this person is able to work or not, right? People may be lying, so you should test them, right? Even if they say that they are not able to work, you just cannot believe them. So you have to test them. So obviously you need to mobilize lots of, for example, medical personnel, and you have to pay for all the tests. And then you have to probably periodically review their disability status. Okay? Some may get better. And so you have to check them often. Okay, obviously, and there is a problem that how you define disability. Okay, how do you define disability, right? You should not be able to work, or should you include, let's say, psychological symptoms as disability, like a severe depression? Is it disability or not? There is all sorts of problems when you think of classifying people into two groups. Okay, and so obviously also it is. It can be error prone. Okay? You may just misclassify people. Okay? Probably it's worse to classify those who are not able to work as a person who are able to work. That's probably worse error than classifying people who are able to work as disabled people. Okay? But the other way is obviously the really a worse error. So when you think about it, the rule can be pretty simple, but actually implementing it is quite difficult. Okay. So it's possible, but not exactly working. You can try, but it can be very costly. Okay, one way of doing it now is, welfare program is a problem because it reduces the wage rate, right? Implicit tax. So the other way of thinking about it, let's increase the wage rate. How? So let's think of low-wage individuals who earns actually very low wage. Just increase wage rate to these people. So we just do not give money, we subsidize the wage. Okay? Think about it. It's pretty, interesting idea. So people who get, let's say, only $5 a month, $5 an hour, let's say 5,000 won per hour, which is pretty low. So we subsidize them. So we make the individual's wage rate to, let's say, 10,000 won per hour. So the government pays 5,000 won per hour for this person. Okay? So that we call it wage rate subsidy. So if you think about it, it obviously will increase the participation, right? Because now the individuals will get at least $10 per hour, let's say. Okay? So market wage rate has a kind of minimum wage rate of $10 per hour. Effect on workers is ambiguous theoretically because there is a substitution effect on income. This is just the pure increase of wage. Okay? It's nothing else. But if we apply the wage rate subsidy only to lower wage rate individuals, substitution effect is likely to be bigger than the income effect. So at the end, their labor supply is likely to increase. Okay? So that's the idea of wage rate subsidy. Another idea is the earnings subsidy. Okay, this earnings subsidy, we will deal with it actually in more detail later, so I'm just not going to go through a detail. I'm just telling that earnings subsidy is different from wage rate subsidy. Wage rate subsidy is just try to directly increase the hourly wage rate. Earnings subsidy is to increase earnings. Okay? So if your earnings is lower than certain threshold, we just give you more money. Okay? So it looks at the total earnings, not your wage rate. Just look at the total earnings, and your total earnings is below the certain threshold, we will give you money. Now, if your earnings is zero, no money, okay? Because this is earnings subsidy. So when you have earnings, when you have your own labor income, you will get the subsidy. Okay? So that's the idea of earnings subsidy. So it's different. So wage rate subsidy is to make W to, let's say, W prime, so increase wage rate. In this case, double H to make double H prime. So it's different. So earnings in wage rate subsidy is earnings subsidy. Okay. At the end, their earnings will be higher, likely. Okay, but the root is different. Just gives the. Okay, so earnings subsidy and wage rate subsidy, two ideas. Earnings subsidy, I will discuss it in much more in detail next class. Okay, wage rate subsidy and earnings. Wage rate subsidy seems to be more effective because the reason is wage rate subsidy is to increase the wage rate only. Okay? So when you increase the wage rate only because of the income and sufficient, and in this case sufficient effect is greater than the income effect, likely. And since the wage rate is higher, so more individuals are likely to work, so it will increase labor supply. Earning subsidy is not that simple because some will increase labor supply, but later you will see that some will actually decrease labor supply. So it's different. So it seems like a wage rate subsidy is a good idea, but wage rate is very difficult to measure. That's a problem. Because not everyone gets hourly wage, right? Quite often your job pays you, let's say, monthly salary, weekly, right? Bi-weekly in some countries. Usually they pay you not in hourly wage rate, but in monthly wage rate or whatever. So different. So how do you measure wage in that sense? Okay. Since it's difficult to measure the wage, obviously there is a problem of fraud. Okay. You can just claim that my wage rate is pretty low. I have higher earnings only because I worked for long hours. My wage is low. So you can claim the wage rate subsidy in that way. So first thing is it's difficult. Earnings is much easier to measure because earnings is just look at how much you earn in total. So your monthly salary is your earnings. It's not your wage rate, but it's your earnings. So it's easier to actually measure the earnings, not the wage. Okay. So theoretically, the wage rate subsidy seems to be a good idea, but in reality, earnings subsidy is actually more practical. So lots of countries have earnings subsidy. Okay. So we will see Korea's program in the next lecture. We call it the EITC, earned income tax credit. So we will discuss it more detail. I think we should stop here today, and then we'll continue our discussion next class.